It's December the 14th, 2021, and our reading today in 2 Chronicles is in chapter 4. He made a bronze altar 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 10 cubits high. He made the sea of cast metal, circular in shape, measuring 10 cubits from rim to rim and 5 cubits high. It took a line of 30 cubits to measure round it. Below the rim, figures of bulls encircled it, 10 to a cubit. The bulls were cast in 2 rows in one piece with the sea. The sea stood on 12 bulls, 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, and 3 facing east. The sea rested on top of them, and their hindquarters were towards the center. It was a handbreadth in thickness, and its rim was like the rim of a cup, like a lily blossom. It held 3,000 baths. He then made 10 basins for washing and placed 5 on the south side and 5 on the north. In them, the things to be used for the burnt offerings were rinsed, but the sea was to be used by the priests for washing. He made 10 gold lampstands according to the specifications for them and placed them in the temple, 5 on the south side and 5 on the north. He made 10 tables and placed them in the temple, 5 on the south side and 5 on the north. He also made 100 gold sprinkling bowls. He made the courtyard of the priests and the large court and the doors for the court and overlaid the doors with bronze. He placed the sea on the south side at the southeast corner. He also made the pots and shovels and sprinkling bowls. So Huram finished the work he had undertaken for King Solomon in the temple of God. The 2 pillars, the 2 bowl-shaped capitals on top of the pillars, the 2 sets of network decorating the 2 bowl-shaped capitals on top of the pillars, the 400 pomegranates for the 2 sets of network, 2 rows of pomegranates for each network, decorating the bowl-shaped capitals on top of the pillars, the stands with their basins, the sea, and the 12 bulls under it, the pots, shovels, meat forks, and all related articles. All the objects that Huram-Abi made for King Solomon for the temple of the Lord were of polished bronze. The king had them cast in clay molds in the plain of the Jordan between Succoth and Zarethan. All these things that Solomon made amounted to so much that the weight of the bronze was not determined. Solomon also made all the furnishings that were in God's temple, the golden altar, the tables on which was the bread of the presence, the lampstands of pure gold with their lamps to burn in front of the inner sanctuary as prescribed, the gold floral work, and lamps and tongs, they were solid gold. The pure gold wick trimmers, sprinkling bowls, dishes, and censers, and the gold doors of the temple, the inner doors to the most holy place, and the doors of the main hall. And then I think we'll just go into chapter 5 and verse 1. When all the work Solomon had done for the temple of the Lord was finished, he brought in the things his father David had dedicated, the silver and gold and all the furnishings, and he placed them in the treasuries of God's temple. Amen. Well, we read in the opening words, he made a bronze altar and so on. The he here, of course, is a reference to a man called Huram. In fact, he's named again in New Zealand, Huram. Do you remember him? In chapter 2 and verse 13, Hiram, king of Tyre, gifted Huram to Solomon for the work of the temple. Huram-Abi, he's called there. And obviously he was one of the greatest and most skilled craftsmen that they had in that society. And that's how he ends up having a very significant role in the building of the temple. Now, it says he made these things. Then later it says, Solomon also made all the furnishings. So there's a summary of the bronze articles that obviously Huram made. That's made clear in verses 12 to 16. But then it says that Solomon made these other things, verses 19 to 22. And then in chapter 1, verse 1, when all the work Solomon had done for the temple of the Lord was finished. Well, it wasn't Solomon who made these things. He's the king on his throne. He didn't get his hands dirty. Of course, it means that all these things were made by Huram, who made them under the authority, according to the design, and for the purposes of Solomon, which were ultimately the purposes of God. But isn't it interesting that it is basically a pagan craftsman who has the key role in the building of the temple? Everything that is made here, of course, is associated with the main point of the temple. We know what that was. This is the place where the holy God of Israel will meet with the sinful people of Israel. And how is that possible? Well, all these bits and pieces, the article, these bits and pieces, the objects that he made, the furnishings, the very structure, everything, the whole thing. What's it to do with? That's the point and the purpose. God meeting with man. But a sinful man who's got to be cleansed. So take, for example, the first thing that's mentioned in verse 2. He, Huram, the craftsman, made the sea of cast metal. Now, this basically was a great big bath. It says in verse 5, it held 3,000 baths. That was a measurement of water at this time. And I don't quite know how much water that is. Let's have a look. I think we're told that's 14,500 gallons. This is a gigantic bath. It rested on those 12 bulls. This was a wonder in itself. But why was it created? We're told at the end of verse 6, but the sea was to be used by the priests for washing. I think if we've been reading along day by day for the last many months, all of this we saw in the tabernacle. It was reinforced in the book of Kings. This is basically an echo of that. Priests, sacrifices, atonement for sin, reconciliation with a holy God. That message is being driven into us again and again and again and again through the history of Israel. And when you put it like that, it's all about reconciliation. That sounds a lot like the gospel, doesn't it? Precisely. The gospel in the Old Testament. Yet, as the book of Hebrews says in the New Testament, all of this is only a shadow of the good things that are coming. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 1. All of this is wonderful. It's real. And it's a gift from God. And they really could know this reconciliation and this peace and this grace of God through these means. But so much of it is merely physical and outward and ceremonial. This was not the end of the story, but it was a very significant milestone along the way, pointing us to the ultimate reality in a verse like Hebrews 9, verse 14. How much more then will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself unblemished to God, cleanse our consciences from acts that lead to death, so that we may serve the living God.